Spying Blind: How Bureaucracy Blinded America Before September 11th. In the sobering and rigorously documented Spying Blind, Amy B. Zegart delivers a damning indictment of the U.S. intelligence community's failure to adapt in the decade leading up to the September 11th attacks. Drawing from in-depth interviews, declassified reports, and years of analysis, Zegart goes far beyond the typical finger-pointing and exposes the rot at the heart of American intelligence: bureaucratic rigidity, institutional inertia, and structural fragmentation. Her central argument is simple but profound. 9/11 did not happen because America lacked warning. It happened because its intelligence institutions lacked the capacity to respond to those warnings effectively. Rather than blaming individuals, Zegart lays responsibility at the feet of organizations themselves, specifically the CIA and the FBI. Both agencies, she argues, were so steeped in outdated Cold War-era thinking, culture, and structures that they were incapable of adapting to the new and rapidly evolving threat of Islamic terrorism. This wasn't merely a failure of imagination. It was a failure of adaptation. An organizational perspective. Zegart opens with a compelling example. Khalid al-Midhar, one of the 9/11 hijackers, was known to the CIA in January 2000. They had his full name, photo, passport number, and even knew he held a U.S. visa. Yet the CIA didn't alert the State Department or the FBI until August 2001, just 19 days before the attacks. Why? Because their organizational procedures weren't designed to prioritize that kind of information sharing. It was not a lapse in logic or ethics, but one embedded in culture and process. Zegart's primary framework views intelligence failures through three core organizational deficiencies: cultural resistance to change, flawed incentive structures, and structural fragmentation. These forces combined to create agencies that were not only slow to respond, but resistant to innovation and collaboration. Despite recognizing the growing threat posed by al-Qaeda, both the CIA and FBI largely failed to shift priorities, reallocate resources, or restructure their approaches in meaningful ways. The canaries in the coal mine. Zegart dissects the notion that 9/11 was a complete surprise. From 1991 to 2001, there were 12 major studies, both classified and unclassified, that diagnosed the organizational shortcomings of U.S. intelligence agencies. These reports, produced by commissions, think tanks, and congressional committees, generated 340 specific recommendations for reform. The results? A mere 10% were implemented before September 11th. Most were ignored. These ignored warnings included the need for better information sharing, more investment in human intelligence, and greater coordination among agencies. Instead, the CIA clung to expensive satellite programs more useful during the Cold War, and the FBI remained primarily a law enforcement agency, ill-equipped and unwilling to function as an intelligence service. The CIA, fighting terror with Cold War tools. The CIA, Zegart argues, was trapped in its own Cold War shadow. It maintained a strong emphasis on electronic surveillance and traditional espionage against state actors, while neglecting the kind of deep, human intelligence work necessary to infiltrate non-state terrorist organizations like al-Qaeda. Director George Tenet, who declared war on bin Laden in 1998, is portrayed not as negligent, but as powerless to shift the inertia of his own organization. His December 1998 "We Are at War" memo was meant to galvanize action, yet it failed to result in meaningful internal restructuring. By 2001, only 5 analysts were dedicated to bin Laden at the Counterterrorist Center. The CIA's organizational culture, risk-averse, compartmentalized, and resistant to change, meant that even when data was available, it wasn't acted on. Zegart presents 11 specific opportunities where the CIA could have intervened to disrupt the 9/11 plot. It missed every single one. The FBI, real men don't type. If the CIA was mired in Cold War espionage, the FBI was stuck in 1930s law enforcement. Zegart describes a culture that viewed intelligence work as ancillary, even unmanly. One field agent reportedly said, "Real men don't type," reflecting an agency where computers were often viewed as unnecessary and where agents with analytical skills were undervalued. Despite making terrorism its #1 priority on paper in 1998, the FBI continued to devote most of its resources to traditional crime fighting. By 2001, only 6% of FBI personnel were working on counterterrorism. Analysts were undertrained, field offices were graded unsatisfactory in counterterrorism, and headquarters actively blocked investigations like the one into Zacarias Moussaoui. Like the CIA, the FBI had a dozen chances to stop the 9/11 plot. It missed them all. Why they didn't change. The heart of the book is its explanation for why adaptation didn't occur. Zegart draws on organizational theory to identify 3 enduring impediments. 1. Nature of bureaucracies. Organizations are designed for efficiency, not adaptability. The CIA and FBI had built up decades of procedures optimized for Cold War conditions. These became barriers to change, not tools of flexibility. 2. Rational self-interest. Leaders within these agencies were often more concerned with budget fights, internal promotions, and interagency turf wars than with reform. The career incentives favored staying the course, not shaking things up. 3. Fragmented political oversight. Congress and the White House failed to push reforms because intelligence oversight was fractured, complicated, and politically risky. Even when leaders like Senators Gary Hart or Bob Graham tried to push for change, bureaucratic and political roadblocks prevailed. Beyond the blame game. One of the most powerful contributions of Spying Blind is its rejection of the blame game. Zegart doesn't deny that people made mistakes, but she argues convincingly that blaming individuals like George Tenet or Louis Freeh misses the point. Even strong leadership cannot reform agencies that are designed to resist it. For example, after September 11th, FBI Director Robert Mueller made IT reform a top priority. Years and hundreds of millions later, the system he backed, virtual case file, was scrapped. It wasn't Mueller who failed. It was the FBI's lack of capability to manage technological transformation. Post 9/11, too little, still too late. Despite the shock of 9/11, Zegart notes that even the most devastating attack on American soil didn't produce the sweeping intelligence reforms many had hoped for. Structural changes, such as the establishment of the Director of National Intelligence, DNI, have done little to fix the underlying problems. Turf wars persist, information sharing remains problematic, and bureaucratic inertia continues to sap reform efforts. As of her 2007 publication, Zegart concluded that the intelligence community's most dangerous deficiencies still remained uncorrected. What needs to be done? While Zegart stops short of offering a step-by-step reform plan, her work implies several critical lessons for policymakers. Culture must change. Without transforming the underlying values and behaviors of intelligence agencies, no structural change will succeed. Reward adaptation. Career advancement must be tied to innovation, interagency cooperation, and effective risk-taking, not simply to tenure or operational success in legacy missions. Fix oversight. Congressional oversight should be streamlined and empowered to enforce change, rather than spread thin across numerous committees. Invest in human intelligence. Satellites can count missiles, but only people can penetrate terrorist networks. Train for the threats we face. Intelligence personnel must be trained to handle decentralized, fast-moving threats. This requires a fundamental rethinking of how intelligence professionals are recruited and developed. Conclusion: a system designed to fail. Spying Blind is an essential book for understanding not just the origins of 9/11, but the deeper systemic failures that continue to haunt U.S. national security. Zegart's great insight is that America's vulnerability did not arise from a lack of information or bad people, but from a rigid, outdated system that was incapable of adapting to a changing world. It's a harsh truth, and one with implications far beyond the halls of Langley and Quantico. The tragedy of 9/11, Zegart argues, was not just that we were attacked, but that we saw it coming, and were blind anyway.